So I came across an interesting article that I wanted to share with you today because I always feel like when we talk about our military community, when I talk about that here in Virginia, in the Hampton Roads area, I don't know if it really falls on deaf ears or people just kind of give me like that stare of, yeah, we hear you, but we really don't understand you or where you're trying to communicate so much effectively that the military community that we have in Hampton Roads is one of those communities that's going to continue to elevate our economy a bit here in Hampton Roads, where we're going to see a stabilization continuously across the marketplace because of affordability of our military community. Really and truly, like military community here in Hampton Roads helps keeps this community propped up, and we see sales prices not really decline because we have so much military income coming into this community. So what I wanted to do is actually break down this article that I read on Zillow today, which I really think is going to like be an eye opener for a lot of individuals who are thinking that the military community does not have such an impact in their community. And we're going to talk about how this is going to impact Hampton Roads continuously and how we've already seen it play out across the board when it comes to being a homeowner in this community. If you don't know who I am, my name is Craig Houston. I'm with the Moving to Norfolk team, and we're going to be breaking down so much information across the next few weeks that you're going to want to be locked in, and you're going to want to go ahead and subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so that way you can always be the first to learn about any and everything about moving to Norfolk and the Hampton Roads community. So let's break down exactly where I'm going with this. If you don't know by now, based on this channel, based on this podcast, I've been in the military for over 20 years, almost 21 years. I retired in 2023 in the summer, and it was one of the best experiences I ever had in my life, and I would not change anything about it. Now, what I will say that's going to show up in this article, though, is that it's going to show how affordability for veterans and active duty service members are not even in a complete disparity. They are very similar, but you're going to see being a veteran actually gives more affordability for a veteran household versus an active duty household. We're going to break that down for you. But what I want you to understand is that throughout my military service, I always try to educate, right? One of the pillars of our team is educate. And educate our young service members, educate our active duty service members on taking advantage of their VA home loan. Matter of fact, I did a podcast with Oscar Avila where we talked about this in so much detail, where we had a veteran homeowner already owning one home on their VA loan, and they wind up purchasing a second home on their VA loan as well and renting out the first one, right? Because they wanted to upgrade property and they had a second use availability for their home VA loan. So there's always opportunities here, and a VA home loan is not a one-time use situation. And I think that's why we get into a lot of confusion at here. If you got questions on that, you got dialogue on that, definitely leave them down below for us, and we'll answer those questions for you. But what we're attempting to do as we are starting to close out 2023 is start to be communicating more effectively with our audience and anyone else who's introduced to what we actually do over here with the Moving to Norfolk team. So this is one of those things where I really want you to understand where we're coming from, understand what we're seeing in the marketplace, but also I want you to understand too is that what we're seeing right now is not going to be unusual. We're going to continually see these type of things. So let's get into what's going on and why we're bringing this episode to you this time around. Like you'll see the article for Zillow says military households hold a housing affordability edge thanks to higher incomes and lower rates. Matter of fact, the subheading on this actually says active duty military families typically have higher housing costs than other households. Now, as you think about that for a second, why would they have higher housing costs? Because, as an active duty service member, you're thinking, okay, what are some of these things that the households would have to actually be more contributing to? Well, like a lot of times it comes down to like just the landscaping, actually having more service provided to your home because you're not typically around all the time, especially if you're deployed in a deployable asset continuously over and over and over again. We're now looking at more extensive deployments in our areas as well too. We went from traditionally having the 4-month deployment to the 6-month deployment to we went to a range during the pandemic to 9-month deployments, and now we're somewhere in between 8 to 9-month deployments typically for now our military force that's actually out and about on deployment now. But let's get into this article a bit here, and I'll give you my opinion and I'll give you my insights as we read through this article. It says, veterans and active duty military households often hold an affordability edge for the home they own or rent over other U.S. households. That edge is smaller for active duty households than for veterans, likely a product of military hotspots often being located in relatively expensive markets. Now, this is very true. Like, if we just talk about my military experience, I was stationed here in Hampton Roads. I was stationed in Washington, D.C. I was stationed in San Diego. And then my final tour was back here in Hampton Roads. So all those are military hotspots, but they're also expensive hotspots as well for a local economy as well too, especially in San Diego. We moved to San Diego in 2014, and we left there at the beginning of the pandemic, March of 2020, and we've seen so much pent-up demand in each one of these markets that we've been in that housing affordability just seemed like it was always out of reach. But realistically, that's because we was uneducated at that point in time, folks. We didn't really get accustomed to being a homeowner until we decided to move to San Diego when we had our PCS orders. And really and truly, that made a significant difference in my life, because what I realized at that point in time, that whether some of the gurus tell you that owning a home is not the right thing to do, paying down debt, getting a home is not, is more important than anything else. But realistically, what comes down to it is actually being a homeowner as a military service member. It gives you so many advantages. And the reason why I say it gives you so many advantages, because I was taught this as a young sailor. It went in one ear and went out the other, because obviously I wasn't paying attention. I had other things on my mind versus what I should have been focusing on was actually generating wealth at that point. But it's always been an opportunity for military service members to PCS to a different location and own a home in a different location while renting out at the previous location that's the military hotspot. And the reason why that's important to note is because realistically, you having someone else pay your wealth to you, okay, where you're gaining equity in a home that you're not living in, but you're living in another one. The military's paying for that home that you're living in currently, but you have a tenant living in the property that you used to occupy on your VA home loan, and they are actually paying the rent for that, okay? And they're paying your rent. They're sometimes paying more than your mortgage. They're at least paying to break even on your mortgage. Even if you're losing $200, that's less that's coming out of your pocket than affording 2 different mortgages and only having one that's you have to worry about, and someone else is helping you offset the other mortgage, but you're gaining control of 2 assets and gaining equity. People always talk about doors, having multiple multi-family units, but I think if you're a service member in our today's workforce, I think that you need to be worried about just having a home that you live in, whether that's 1 year, 2 years, whatever. And then if you PCS to a different location, maintaining that asset and using that asset to continue to generate you more wealth over time. Like if you could actually get to a point where you have one house paying for your cars, you have one house actually paying for your current mortgage, you have one house paying for vacations, and you are doing this 2 or 3 times, because most military service members transfer out of a location once to 2 times or even 3 times in most cases during their entire tenure in the military. So this is one of those things that I think is very important to note, okay? So it says, as we continue on with this article, as of 2021, the latest data available, veteran and active duty renter households generally spent a smaller share of their income on rent than all other renters because they tend to have higher incomes. The typical veteran renter had nearly identical rent payments as households without a veteran or active duty service member. But veterans' higher earnings meant they spent only 27.4% of their income on rent compared to 30.4% for non-military households. Now, some may be unaware how this works, okay? Military service members who have dependents, or if they reach a certain pay grade, in whatever military branch or service that they're in, because they're different by military branches. They receive a thing called basic allowance for housing, okay, which means that they get their monthly base pay of whatever that income is based on their pay grade and rank, just based on their pay grade, okay, and then in certain cases, when these individuals become eligible for basic allowance for housing in whatever the amount that is, because there's a single and there is a dependent one, which that doesn't really matter right now. But what really matters is that they get this information and they actually take advantage of it here, and they are now combining their income. The basic allowance for housing is actually tax free. Okay, it's no tax on your basic allowance for housing. So you're getting your base pay, you're getting your basic allowance for housing, you're combining those together. That gives you a higher wage than most individuals who haven't afford not only just working, but having to afford rent, afford a mortgage, or whatnot. And in some cases, most service members purchase a home or rent a home that's less than what their actual basic allowance for housing is, giving them that little cushion where they are realistically gaining money, but also controlling the asset or renting at a point where it doesn't affect their basic income. Okay. So this is where that comes into comparison. So you see, spent only 27.4% of their income on rent to 30.4%. This is talking about veterans. And here's the other thing when it comes to veterans. Typically, a veteran gets out of the military, whether they retire. In most cases, they retire, or in some cases, they don't retire, but they also wind up somehow receiving VA disability. And once they get to a certain point of a VA disability rating, which is a whole nother subject in itself, but if they get to a certain point with a VA disability rating, they can start receiving income for their disabilities. Okay. And the reason why that's important is because that's offsetting income. That's income where it's non-taxable. And now they have, if they can actually get a place of employment where they can actually work, where their disabilities are not going to be impactful to what they're actually doing for work, they combine that income together. And now they're making more income versus what the typical household homeowner has, and makes them have to spend less money out of their basic necessities of income because they have higher wages to their advantage. Okay. So that's why this number is very impressive. About 3% less spent on rent or mortgages if you were a veteran. But then it says that affordability edge was smaller for active duty renter households who spent 29.3% of their income on rent. The smaller advantage is due to higher rents paid by active duty renters, which are typically about $370 higher than rents paid by non-military renter households. Okay, so this is basically saying to you that if you are active duty, you are actually spending a little bit more than what the typical veteran is spending. And the smaller advantage is due to higher rents being paid by active duty renters. Now, this is where I was going at the beginning of this. Military hotspots obviously needs to address housing for military service members. And housing on base is filling up all the time. There's so much demand for housing, especially here in Virginia in Hampton Roads, that military home housing is usually has a backlog of a waiting period for people to get into base housing. So with these active duty service members, if they can't get base housing, they have to go out in the marketplace and find actual housing in the marketplace. Now, rents are going to continue to be increased. We've seen this over time, but then also homeowners or investors who are purchasing homes to rent out on the open market know that they have a demand service that they need to fulfill, and that's for military homeowners or renters who needs to be in the marketplace, which means that rents are going to be a little bit higher. And with those rents being typically higher, the service member is typically the one who has to be the one who needs the affordability and somewhere to stay, and they're the ones who can actually make the jump in rent. So this is not surprising to me, but this is something to pay attention to. And some may look at this as, wow, we should be doing our military service members a service of actually making sure that they can afford these rents and not really making them pay higher rents. But that is what capitalism is in this market at this point in time, that people actually see an opportunity to increase demand. With more in demand coming in, that means there needs to be a little bit more supply. And if the supply is limited, that means the factors of rent goes up as well too. And that means that you still have to be able to afford somewhere to stay. and put a roof over your head. And this is what happens. We see higher rents. And this most typically is going towards our active duty active duty households versus our non active duty households, where they may not even be able to afford those higher rents as well too. Now that's what this article leaves out. This article leaves out the fact that typically, you know, if rents are going higher and higher demand opportunities as well too, right? So to me, it doesn't appear that way, but realistically, if it's always going to be demand. What is the marketplace saying that they really want at this point in time? Okay, like if we are talking about rents being in a place where you don't want to actually stay, or there's not hot demand for people to actually have interest in living in those areas, you're not going to see the rent increase. But if there's a typical hot demand for an area that's good, that's so dominating in our area, like in some of these hot spots like Chesapeake, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and now even in some cases in Suffolk, you're going to see that those rents are going to be a little bit higher in those harder to fill areas. It's just going to happen. But our military service members may be the ones who actually have the income to actually afford the higher rents that's actually going up as well too. So let's continue on with this article. It says veteran homeowners also spend less of their income on mortgage payments than non-veteran counterparts, despite having nearly identical incomes. Okay, in 2021, the typical veteran household paid 14.6% of its income on a mortgage payment, compared with 15.4% of all other households. That advantage likely comes with the lower interest rates from Veterans Affairs loans, okay, the VA home loan, which is the privately funded mortgage backed by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. For a primary home purchase in 2022, the median interest rate for a VA loan was 4.75%, and the median interest rate for a conventional loan was 4.99%. Okay, so you're talking about almost a 0.25 basically a 1 point on the interest rate difference between a conventional loan and the VA loan. Now, for those who are unaware, typically when the conventional loan rates increase, the VA home loan rate will be a little bit lower than what that VA, but then what that conventional interest rate is, because it's a government-backed loan. So this is one of the advantages that's being passed on to our active duty and veteran community, is that they typically have a lesser rate than what the average market rate is for a conventional loan. Okay. Now, other advantages of a VA loan includes the ability to purchase a home with no down payment and lower fees than a conventional mortgage loan. Now, there is very, very true. This is one of the main staples of the VA loan, is that it's a zero money down program. Now, that does not mean that you do not have to afford closing costs. Now, in certain cases, agents can help you actually work out maybe a deal with the seller to where they may cover your closing costs, and you may not have to come out of pocket with the closing costs as well. But the VA will, surpass you with actual down payment, and they will place instead they will actually do what is called a VA funding fee. That funding fee is basically your private mortgage insurance being paid up front, but it's rolled into the loan, where you don't have to make that payment continuously every month as in addition to your mortgage payment. But also, closing cost fees can somewhere range between 3 to 4%, depends on the purchase price. And with that, sometimes you may have to bring the closing costs to the table, or you may be able to, like I said, negotiate with the seller where they may be willing to actually afford the cost of the closing costs to actually get this transaction completed. But the VA only requires that you don't have to pay a down payment. Okay, so that's one of the other advantages of the VA home loan. Okay, so now the affordability picture is different for active duty homeowners, who typically spend more of their income on mortgage, 18.6% in 2021, than civilian homeowners. Another piece of evidence pointing to military hotspots tending to be in relatively expensive areas. Okay, active duty households are eligible for the same VA loans that veterans qualify for, but still typically have higher mortgage payments than other homeowners. Now, I wonder what that could actually be, because they didn't really go into detail on why that could be a little bit more higher for active duties versus veterans. It could be because the veteran actually locked in their rate and their mortgage payment a whole lot earlier than the current active duty service members who are actually going out in the marketplace and purchasing homes now, which could be a bit higher, especially when the veteran now has another job on top of what they're actually receiving in additional income, whether that's a pension or that's disability or disability rating allocating to actually additional funds, which means that they have a significant higher amount of wages coming in, where the affordability of their mortgage is going to be lesser because how much money or income they're actually bringing in. Now, what I want to actually point out on this chart here is that if you're looking at what the active duty homeowner is actually getting, having to expense out of their income to actually afford their housing burden in San Diego, which I lived there before, about almost 30% of the active duty service member income is going towards housing, which the median housing payment is about $2,600 in San Diego, Chula Vista, or Carlsbad, which equates to about 118,000 median income. And then you got Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ontario, which is a little bit northern of Norfolk of San Diego. And then you have Washington, D.C., which we live there too, which is another 22% housing burden out of the income, which is sitting around about $2,200. And their income there is about $134,500. Okay. Now, but Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and Newport News, Hampton Road area, where the Moving to Norfolk podcast is airing from, is 21% of the housing burden in our community for military service members, active duty military service members. Now, the housing burden, though, actually looks like a housing payment around about $1,600. Now, I would imagine that it's a little bit more than that now. I'm pretty sure this is based on 2022 numbers. And the median income is around about $86,000 throughout Hampton Roads. Now, but looking at this, Hampton Roads for active duty service members, is coming in as the fourth most expensive area for you to actually find housing. And coming out of your income is going to give you about almost a 22% housing burden to actually afford either rent or housing in this area. But this is a homeowner. So this is what homeowners have to understand, is that at least about 22% of your income is going to be dedicated to actually finding affordable housing that makes sense for you as that service member. Now, let's look at what the veteran in our area is actually paying right around this area, right? So now they're not in the top four. So this is actually going to be very interesting. Let's see where they actually fall. Oh, man, they're way down here. So let's just see how many that is. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19th. As a veteran, for the housing burden out of your income in Virginia, it's about 15.4%, which equates to about your median home payment being about $1,500 and your income being about $110,000 in this area. Now, that is actually surprising to me. I'm actually seeing this number for the first time with you, and that's surprising to me a bit here, but it also makes sense because, like I said before, the income is going higher as a veteran, and you're seeing that they probably already locked in their payment for homes that they're actually affording a little bit lower than what the typical average active duty homeowner can as well too, but it's significantly lower of a housing burden because of the additional income that they're actually bringing in, which is amazing here as well. So this is what I want you to do. Comment down below. What do you think about this article that Zillow put out about military affordability for active duty and veteran homeowner? I'm actually interested to hear your comments on this and kind of learn more about what you're thinking about as you're weighing your options on where you're going to move to, maybe where you're even going to retire to, or maybe where your next PCS season may be coming to if you're an active duty service member. And if you're coming to the Hampton Roads area, we would definitely love the opportunity to just have a conversation with you and understand if we can address and help you with any of your moving needs that you may be having coming up. Because one of the things that we always pride ourselves on, whether you're moving in 2 weeks or you're moving in 120 days, we're always here to help you. And we always want to do the best that we possibly can for you. So go ahead and hit us with a text, a video, phone call, or even with just anything that you can find, or shoot us an email. And all that'll be linked down in the description below. And it'll be the first pinned comment as well too. You already know what time it is. It's been Craig Houston with the Moving to Norfolk team. And you already know what time it is. I'll see you in the next video. Y'all stay safe. Peace.